started this whole tragic cycle, where an angry young person seeks to lash out by murdering little kids. With respect to becoming famous, one rule I try to follow is that I will never say the names of these mass murderers. If they want to be well known, I hope everyone in elected office, I'd like everyone in the news media to follow that rule as well. They deserve to be forgotten in utter obscurity. But we also have an obligation to stop this. Every time there's a mass murder, there's a pattern that plays out. Number one, there's an expression of grief, of love for the community. There are millions of us who lift the community up in prayer. Inevitably, that produces a response from the political left, where they scream in unison, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. Now, I'll tell you, Mr. President, I believe in the power of prayer. And I will continue praying for communities that are hurting, whether from a natural disaster or a horrific crime or anything else. But I agree with the sentiment. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. That is exactly right. We need action. And what is so infuriating is every time there's a mass shooting, Democrats in this chamber stand up and they don't actually want to do something to stop the murderers. Instead, they want another gun control bill to disarm law-abiding citizens that won't actually stop the murders, that won't actually protect our kids. In September of last year, I introduced legislation that would be the most far-reaching school safety legislation ever enacted. It would double the number of police officers on campuses, devoting $15 billion to putting armed police officers on campus to protect our kids, the single most important step we can do. It would also devote $10 billion for mental health professionals on campuses, because so many of these troubled murderers had warning signs leaping off the page. It also devotes $2.56 billion for physical security at schools, to help enhance the security at schools. When I introduced this bill, it first came up as an amendment on the much-touted bipartisan gun control bill last year that did nothing to stop violent crime. But it satisfied the left-wing donors of the Democrat Party. When my amendment was voted on the Senate floor, I'm sorry to say every single Democrat in this chamber voted no. All of them, every one. Afterwards, I went to this floor, I stood on this floor, and I tried to pass the bill by unanimous consent. And when that happened, the senator from Connecticut stood up and objected. Now, I have to say, leading up to that unanimous consent request, numerous reporters had asked me in the hallway, why are the Democrats objecting to this? And I was forced to say, I do not know. Because to date, they have not articulated any reason. They have not explained why they oppose more police officers in schools. They have not explained why they oppose more mental health counselors in schools. They have not explained why they oppose more funding for enhanced physical security in schools. So I was quite interested to hear the senator from Connecticut give his reasons. I was disappointed that day. The senator from Connecticut stood up and uttered two words, I object. And he sat down. That was it. His answer was just no. Mr. President, I stood on this floor then, and I said something that I said, God forbid there is going to be another school shooting. I pray to God there isn't. But we're going to find a day when another one of these happens, another deranged lunatic commits this kind of mass murder. And if there is not a police officer at the front door, I said, remember this moment. Remember this moment. Because if the senator from Connecticut had not stood up and said, I object, this bill would have passed the Senate unanimously. If this bill had passed into law, $15 billion to double the number of police officers on campus, and that was available at public schools, at private schools, at parochial schools, what that would have meant is that there's a very real possibility an armed police officer would have been at the front door of the Covenant School in Nashville. Now, as we look at what happened, every one of us that's a parent or a grandparent is beyond horrified at what sort of deranged person murders little children. But we also know that that shooter came to the front door and shot the front door open. If this bill had passed, funding for school security, that front door could have been made more secure, so the shooter couldn't have blasted in. But even more importantly, look, many of us have watched the body cam footage. It's horrific, it's deeply disturbing, but I'll tell you, it's also awe-inspiring. You saw the Nashville police officers arrive on campus about 15 minutes after the shooting began. They enter the campus, they're scared, they don't know what's going on, but they're looking for the shooter. They're wearing bulletproof vests, they're searching for the shooter, they're going up the stairs, and they hear the sound of gunshots, and the police officers do what police officers should do. They head towards the shots. They risk their lives, and they encounter the shooter and shoot the shooter dead. The heroism of those officers saved lives that day. If this bill had passed, those officers might not have been 15 minutes away. They might have been standing at the front door. The purpose of this bill was to have those officers at the front door so that when the deranged shooter showed up and tried to shoot in the door, the officers could stop the shooter right there and then, which would have meant that not a single child needed to die. I told this body, if we didn't act, the consequences would be horrific. And yet the sad reality, I do not understand why our Democrat colleagues in this body do not support having police officers keep our kids safe. Why, when it comes to this issue, the only thing that interests them is disarming the people at home who pose no threat rather than protecting our kids. As I said, Mr. President, I wish I wasn't back here today. I wish this had passed last year. I wish Democrats were willing to work together on really solving this problem. But sadly, this pattern replays over and over again. I have two different bills that I'm going to put before this body, but I'm going to start with the first one, the one I've just described. $15 billion for police officers to double the number of police officers on campus to protect our kids. You know, when you go to the bank and you deposit money in the bank, there are armed police officers in the bank. Why? Because we want to protect the money we save. Why on earth do we protect a stupid deposit more than our children? If they're parents that don't want police officers protecting their kids, I don't know those parents. Well, we have the opportunity right now to double the police officers on campus and keep kids safe. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-1082, which is at the desk. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, as I understand it, the senator has 2 unanimous consent requests. I will object to both, and I will make my comments when the senator makes his second unanimous consent request. So for now, on this first objection, on this first request, so as to save time, I'll wait for my comments on the second and simply object to this one. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
So history is repeated. We still don't have an explanation as to why police officers on campus is not a good thing. Maybe we'll get it. We were told we'll get a speech. So we'll see what that is. That's what happened last time. All right. The Democrats don't like that. Let me give you a simpler bill. A simpler bill that would spend unused COVID education funds. There are over $100 billion in funds that Congress has appropriated to the schools, that under the restrictions put in place from the Democrats, that money cannot be used for school safety. That money cannot be used to make our kids safer. In September, I introduced this bill as well. It's a one-page bill. It's a very simple bill. It says the schools can choose to use that money to enhance school safety. It says if a school wants to use some of that money to hire a police officer, the school can do so. It says if the school wants to use some of that money to enhance their physical security, the school can do so. It gives flexibility to the schools. In September, when I attempted to pass this, I asked, why would anyone possibly oppose this? I don't know how a Democrat senator goes home to your state. I don't know how you go home to Connecticut or New Jersey or Michigan and look in the eyes of a superintendent, look in the eyes of a teacher and say, no, I will not let you spend the money on school security. Doesn't matter if your kids are afraid. Doesn't matter if your teachers are afraid. We, the Democrats in Congress, know better than you, and you may not spend $1 of this on school security. And let me be clear. This would have passed in September, except for 2 magic words uttered by the senator from Connecticut. I object. Now, last time he went on a discourse about how this was not the full legislative process, that we hadn't negotiated with him. And goodness, that must be comfort to the parents who are scared at home, that we hadn't sat there in a detailed negotiation. Every year, this body passes bill after bill after bill by unanimous consent. Every senator here knows how to do that. The reason it doesn't go through committee process, by the way, is because the Democrats control the committees and they don't want to debate this. So if you hear a bunch of process arguments from the senator from Connecticut, gosh, what he said last time, this isn't real. It is only not real because the Democrats are objecting. That's what makes it not real, because they are blocking it. But to say it's not passing because I'm objecting, is like the arsonist complaining there's a fire. I ask you in all seriousness, Mr. President, how do you explain to a parent back home? How do you explain to a superintendent? How do you explain to a teacher? There's something wrong with you having the ability to spend this money on school safety. I don't know how to articulate that. I am looking forward to hearing it. We'll see if we do. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-1081, which is at the desk. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Connecticut.
the senator is right. I have very...
All right, so we heard Senator Ted Cruz there on the floor advocating for bringing police officers into all schools in the country and then issuing a proposed bill on that measure that would allocate $15 billion a year to that measure. You're watching Live Now from Fox, everyone. We are going to take our first break here of this hour. Stay right here with us.